Good Saturday morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well so far. Got some college football today, full slate of games. We've got the Apple Cup tonight, which I will be streaming a watch along of tonight on YouTube right here. But I think the real main event is, of course, the NFL when it comes to this channel, and the Seahawks do indeed have a game on Sunday afternoon. Full slate of NFL action. Little bit neutered because of the three Thursday games, but nevertheless, we've got plenty of games tomorrow, Sunday, and in about 28 hours, we're going to be looking at a Raiders versus Seahawks kickoff. So, what can we say about this one? Because it's been a little while since we've seen the Seahawks play. They took a week off, they had their bye week. They went into their bye week on a little bit of a disappointing note with not playing particularly well against Tampa in Germany. And that has been the image that Seahawks fans have had to have freshest in their mind for 2 weeks now of this team. So you got to start putting that image to bed because you know you're better than that. You know you're better than what you did against Tampa, getting run all over by a team that can't run the ball, allowing an extremely high completion percentage to Brady and those receivers, not being able to run the ball at all the things that went wrong in that game. You know you're better than that because right before that game you went on a 4-game winning streak. You looked really good against the Cardinals twice. You looked really good against the Giants. Going back to a little before that, you have games against the Lions, even the Broncos if you want to go all the way back there. You know you're better than that, but you have to go out there and start proving it. And it's going to be a very intriguing December and January for these Seahawks. And how we choose to launch ourselves into that December with this game is going to determine a lot of whether or not it's actually going to be good or not. So, this Raiders team, they're coming in. Now, they're feeling themselves a little bit because they won a big game last week against a hated rival. But overall, they're a bad team having a disappointing year, and they've got a lot of injuries. They're missing some key guys. The Seahawks, not so much. Pretty healthy right now. About as healthy as you're going to find a team in week 12. We had one guy on the whole injury report this week. So life is good right now as a Seahawks fan. We're feeling good about where this team is headed. And if we can find a way to win against the Las Vegas Raiders, this very winnable game at home, we'll be set on the right path here. So let's talk through this one a little bit and figure out how we do it. So the Raiders this year, the reason why people thought they were going to be good, I think Vegas had their over-under at like 10.5, was mostly because of that offense. Mostly, within that offense, these skill position players. Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, good 1-2 receivers. If you want to throw in Mac Hollins as a number 3, he's pretty good too. Darren Waller, one of the better tight ends in the NFL. And Josh Jacobs, who, look, I mean, 2 of those guys are having monster years, in fairness, right? So you got some of it right. It ended up being a pretty good offense for those 2 guys. Devontae Adams on pace to get targeted like 180 times this year or something like that. Maybe 190. Josh Jacobs on pace to have like 1,700 rushing yards. But the air has been let out of the balloon a little bit because Hunter Renfrow hasn't really played all that much this year. He's currently out on IR. You've got Darren Waller also on IR, not having his best year. So right away, you're down to Adams and Jacobs. Now, we know that Josh Jacobs injured on Friday, the calf. So you're looking at that and you go, okay, you've taken away their playmaking tight end, you've taken away their number 2 receiver. Now you might be taking away their star running back. And by the way, when I say star running back, I mean it in about the firmest term possible. The only other running back who's gotten any kind of real action this year on the Raiders is Brandon Bolden, and he's gotten 8 carries. He is literally the second running back on that team. He has 8 carries on the season. Derek Carr is by far the second leading rusher on that team. They have no depth in that backfield. So I don't know if Josh Jacobs plays. I don't know if he doesn't play. But I do know that they don't really have any mechanism by which to replace him at all. Their backup running backs are Amir Abdullah, Brandon Bolden, and Zamir White. And I like Zamir White. Honestly, I even like Amir Abdullah, but they barely play this year. They're barely even running backs. Amir Abdullah has like 10 catches this year and 0 carries. So they don't use him as a running back, really. So if they lose Jacobs, that's obviously huge. And while we're at it, let's take a look at that offensive line, which the Raiders have not built with the same love and care and affection as their skill positions. Colton Miller, their only really good offensive lineman, their left tackle, first round pick, questionable. Now, I expect him to play, but he might not. That is at least a possibility. And even if he does play, like Jacobs, what is he really going to be able to give you? So you do the math, and suddenly this star-studded Raiders offense has a decent quarterback. Derek Carr's a decent quarterback. It's got possibly nothing in the backfield. If Josh Jacobs is out, they have nothing back there. Literally, their second best running back this year has like 35 yards in 10 games, mind you. They have one superstar receiver, and he is a superstar, and we're going to have to deal with him regardless. But Mac Hollins and Keelan Cole would be their number 2 and number 3, I think. Mac Hollins is okay, and Keelan Cole has 4 catches this year. So that's how things are going for that Raiders offense. And remember, Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller have missed several games now. So if one of those guys was going to suddenly explode and become a prolific receiver in this league, probably would have happened by now. So you look at Mac Hollins and you say, okay, he's producing, he's all right. But Keelan Cole is not taking advantage of this opportunity in the slightest. No receiver is on this team behind Holland and Devontae, actually. So it's not working. Excuse me. And once you start to really strip all this stuff away from that Raiders offense, like I said, you've got one real pass catching threat, and then you've got an offensive line that is mediocre anyway, right? Like, Derek Carr is turning into Alex Smith this year as is. He's checking it down constantly because he doesn't trust his offensive line because it's so lackluster. But if you take away Colton Miller, Carr's blindside protector, and a guy who is seemingly playing at a relatively, I don't want to say all-pro level, but maybe Pro Bowl level this year, and what do you really have left on that offense? You've got Devontae Adams, and that could be it. Even if, Josh Jacobs might play, but he's not going to be Josh Jacobs. He's not going to be the dominant Josh Jacobs who has like 1,200 yards from scrimmage this year and 5.1 yards per carry. He's going to be Josh Jacobs with a bad calf. So this is an offense that has been stripped down significantly from what they can do. We know for a fact we're not getting Renfrow or Waller, and the Raiders offense with no Renfrow and no Waller went scoreless against the Saints, and then was able to pump out a couple 20-point games against like the Jaguars, blew that lead, the Colts blew that lead, and finally they get a little bit of action at the end of the game against the Broncos, but for most of that Broncos game, they had 13 points. So pulling teeth for them to really move the ball right now, and that's with Josh Jacobs, by the way. So when the Raiders have the ball, let's attack that offensive line. We need to take huge steps away from that Tampa Bay game. One of the worst, most pathetic pass rush performances in franchise history, I have to imagine. 1 QB pressure in that game. Now you're playing a quarterback who really doesn't do well when pressured. That's one of the knocks on Derek Carr. Historically, you start to get pressure on him, he gets rattled, he starts making mistakes, he starts not performing. You hit him a few times, he'll disintegrate. So you've got to flip the script on that. And looking at this Raiders offensive line, there's no reason why that should be an issue. I don't think you're going to have to send a lot of blitzes at the Raiders to make it happen. I don't think you're going to have to do anything too fancy to get it to happen. Your guys against their guys should be good enough. So I'm looking for some much improved quarterback pressure against these Raiders. And I'm expecting it to come mostly from that defensive line and the edge rushers. I think that Nwosu obviously did not have his best game last week. He's going to be geared up and ready to go to try to get back on the right track here. I think he's going to have a big game. And basically, the biggest and maybe only real concern that the Seahawks should have on defense going into this game is Davante Adams. He's proven that even when he's the only guy out there who can make a play, he's still making plays. You can double team him, he still might make a play. You can put the best corner in the league on him like the Broncos tried to do last week. He still might make a play. He still might win the game. So I'm definitely not advocating for sleeping on that part of the Raiders. Davante Adams is having an incredible year. He's an incredible player. So what I would say is don't be afraid to throw multiple defenders at him. Don't be afraid to double team him. Don't be afraid to triple team him. Mac Hollins is not going to beat you. Mac Hollins is not going to have some 200-yard game and beat you. Keelan Cole is not going to have 200 yards and beat you. You know who could have 200 yards? Davante Adams. So I know it's not necessarily a tenet of this defense, but if you need to throw a double team or even a triple team at Davante Adams, don't be shy, especially if Josh Jacobs is limited or out. What else on this team is going to beat you right now? You take care of that. You get some pressure on a very mediocre Raiders offensive line, and I think this defense could hold the Raiders to 10 points or less. I think it could be that kind of game. You're at home. You're coming off the bye. You're healthy. You get Trey Brown back. The pieces are in place for you to play very well. When you're on offense, you have maybe an even easier matchup against these Raiders defensive players. So you look at the Raiders defense, and they were one of the reasons before the season why you might have thought, well, this is why they're not a Super Bowl contender, but they should be pretty good, right? They kind of had what people want. They had two superstar edge rushers, right? They had Max Crosby, who is having an amazing year, playing at a basically all-pro level, and they brought in Chandler Jones, a Pro Bowl level player from the Cardinals who seemed to have something left. So everything was built from that foundation of we have two dominant edge rushers. The rest will take care of itself. Well, number one, Chandler Jones has not played well this year. He's got half a sack in 10 games. And two, even if he was playing well, there are many holes on this Raiders defense that don't go away just because you have good pass rushers. This Raiders defense is largely a one-man show with Max Crosby, and don't get me wrong, he's going to be a problem. He's going to be an issue for this Seahawks front. He's an issue against every team he plays, pretty much. But they don't really get pressure from anybody else. You look at their defense, they don't have a single player other than Max Crosby with more than one sack this year. Chandler Jones and Clelin Ferrell have been essentially useless rushing the passer this season so far. You know Chandler Jones is down bad when he can't even get to Russell Wilson. That's his favorite guy in the universe to sack. And last week they played twice now, and he's barely touched Wilson. So that's how you know, that's how the season's going for Chandler. Their linebackers, Perryman's okay. I think Perryman's a pretty good player, but other than that, they got nothing. Everything else in that defensive front, that front seven, really, pretty bad. Their defensive tackles, mediocre at best. Their Sam and Will linebackers, bleh. And they're actually missing one of their part-time linebackers this week. Name has slipped my mind momentarily, but it is a front seven you should be able to run on. And it's also a secondary you should be able to pass on. I like Rock Ya-Sin, but he's not a great player. He's a good player, but I'm looking at that and I'm going, okay, Lockett, Metcalf, whoever ends up on him from play to play, that's a matchup we should definitely look to exploit. And I don't see a whole lot else in that secondary. I know they're not good tacklers, so try to get Ken Walker on the edge. This is something the Hawks Nest mentioned last night. You get Ken Walker on the edge, and you try to make these safeties and corners tackle them, and good things are going to happen for you, basically. So I'm optimistic about this one. I think there's a lot of things we should be able to do against this Raiders defense. They're not good. In terms of points allowed, they're bad. They're like 24th in the league in points allowed. But if you look at the advanced metrics, they are worse than that. They are one of the worst defenses in the league, if not the worst, in many of the advanced metrics. So there should be a lot of things that you can do. You should be able to run the ball. You should be able to throw the ball. They got rid of Jonathan Hankins. They traded him to the Cowboys, so they don't have that big 350-pound nose tackle in the middle to take up space and stuff the run up the middle. You should be able to do some of that. Should be able to attack that secondary with your receivers. Their linebackers, like I said, other than Perryman, pretty bad, so you should be able to attack them with tight ends. You should be able to do whatever you want against this defense, really. They don't do much of anything well except Max Crosby. Whatever he does, he's doing great. You to a certain extent, we saw this last week when the Broncos played the Raiders. I know the Broncos only scored 16 points, and people get, obviously that's the headline. The Broncos offense looked better in that game than they have all year, I think. Even only scoring those 16 points, in terms of the process and the execution of that Broncos offense, that was better than I think they've looked in any game except maybe the first Raiders game. They got off track a little bit because of Melvin Gordon's fumble and a couple other little hiccups, but they looked better. So that's all you need to know about this Raiders defense. They made the Broncos offense look competent. That's how you know there's a big problem over there. So you look at that and you go, okay, Geno should be able to do whatever he wants to do against the secondary. If you got a double Max Crosby, then so be it. I understand he's a dominant edge rusher, but there should be nobody else on this team that is a real threat to get to the quarterback from play to play. And their defense, even though they added Patrick Graham, a big-time defensive coordinator in the offseason, it's a relatively simplified defense. This is something that me and Brandon talked about on stream last night as well. They'd like to run those five-man fronts, 5 defensive linemen against 5 offensive linemen, and that does do some things for you as a defense that are good, but it also makes you a little more predictable and easy to play against. So if the Raiders decide to do a lot of that, then that should allow for easy diagnosis of the play from Geno Smith, and we all know how good he's been at that this year. So adding it all up, I'm foreseeing a good amount of points for the Seahawks offense in this game, and that should be enough to win. So at the end of the day, I'm going like 27-10. 27-10 Seahawks. I'm feeling good. I think this Raiders team is kind of just waiting for somebody to really put them out of their misery. They don't seem to particularly like playing for Josh McDaniels, who would. They seem like they're waiting for somebody to just push them over. And obviously I understand the Raiders have been in almost every game they've played this year. In fact, with the exception of the Saints game, you could say that they've been in every game. And there are several games they played this year where they should have won. They should have beaten the Cardinals. They had a big lead and blew it. They had a big lead on Jacksonville and blew it. Big lead on the Colts and blew it. This is not a run-of-the-mill 3-7 team, but I believe they are significantly worse than they were when the season started, just because these offensive skill players are dropping like flies. So I do believe we are going to face a team as bad as their record on Sunday, and put all that together, and I think we're going to see good results. I think we're going to be coming out of this Sunday feeling very good about where this team is, and that's all there is to say. So there's obviously some other exciting stuff happening in the NFL this week to watch for. There's going to be a very compelling result in Carolina before our game kicks off, or right as our game is kicking off. The 49ers are playing and all that, but the main focus is take care of the Raiders. Don't let them start feeling good about themselves. Don't let them carry in a bunch of momentum from that Denver win and put them out of their misery at 3-8. They can go into the offseason and figure out, do they want to get rid of Derek Carr? Can they afford to get rid of Josh McDaniels, etc., etc.? Don't let them start feeling good about themselves. You leave Devontae in single coverage, that's one of the ways they could start feeling good about themselves, right? He could have like 5 catches on the opening drive and catch a touchdown, and suddenly they're like, and suddenly they're feeling good about themselves. avoid that. All right, I'll see you guys later. Go Hawks. We'll do some stream. We'll do the stream tonight for the Apple Cup. Obviously going to be streaming after this Seahawks Raiders game, so keep an eye out for the post-game stream, post-game video as well. And, yeah, go Hawks.